Hello, everybody. It looks like we have about 16 people already in. Welcome to the future of cannabis medicine. Your host today, beaming in, will be Dr. Janice, as well as Dr. Calumet Alif. And I'll have them actually both introduce themselves and also give you a little sense of where they're coming from on the future, what their perspective might be. So my name's Leslie McAaron. I am a public health angle here and environmental health, and I'm at the University of Colorado Anschutz campus, but I am beaming in from Albuquerque, New Mexico. So I will pass it to Dr. Janice to just give us a little introduction.
Hello there, and thank you guys for having me. I'm a stand-in for Dr. Jessica Knox, but I'm Dr. Janice Knox. I'm one of 4 doctors who practice what we call endocannabinology. So we consider ourselves endocannabinologists because we believe that we always start with the science before we begin to think about what cannabis brings to the table. And that's because it's a bigger picture than just cannabis by itself. And from a 50,000-foot view, we also realize that so many different facets of life can be affected by our understanding initially the science and then applicable anything that adapts or changes that science. So that the angle we come at from is teaching the science, understanding the patterns and the rhythms that we've learned because we understand the endocannabinoid system. And as clinicians, we are daily practicing how to apply not only cannabis, but things we call cannabimimetics that affect this physiology. So that's what we're all about. And I'm in Portland, Oregon area.
Great, we will pass it to Dr. Carumet. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation, and to the council that's really working hard. I know, Leslie, you're one of the main people working hard to upgrade the standards of medicinal cannabis and introduce organic standards. So my background, interestingly, organic is organic medicinal chemistry as an undergrad at Harvard, and then I went to Stanford where I trained in anesthesia, but primarily focused in clinical pharmacology, which is the study of how the drugs that doctors actually give to people, how do they actually affect them, which ironically isn't studied that much. Physicians are trained to follow certain protocols and use particular medicines, but to understand the combinations of those medicines, especially back when I was in training, that was a very new thing and not a particularly common thing. And so understanding drug interactions, the pharmacokinetics, bioavailability, a lot of these sorts of things. So I had a background in botanical medicine because of the research I did in undergrad involved plants that are tumor promoting agents. And that ended up sending me off in a very interesting direction to the point where I was working with a startup in South San Francisco area, Silicon Valley area, that I ended up working in tropical rainforests like the Amazon with traditional healers and bringing back plant medicines that they use to see if they could be converted into pharmaceutical medicines. So I mention all of that because I have, 40 some years of background in looking at the clinical pharmacology and the viability of medicinal agents, both synthetic and natural botanical, either complex botanical or botanical derivatives. And that's a big issue these days with cannabis because of concepts of full spectrum, people wanting to eliminate THC, and others, pharmaceutical companies wanting to create either isolates or derivatives of particular cannabinoids. So that's kind of the breadth of my perspective, I guess.
It's really such a layered profession, and in a way we're kind of creating something brand new. And
yes,
what I really see even in this constellation of 3 people is that there's a lot of different expertise and different angles from which to come. The one question we have in our box that I want to address, and I do want to encourage people to be pushing us questions, throughout. I don't love to leave the Q&A at the end because I think it's when you have a pressing question, you just need an answer. So our first question is really where could we send somebody for information? Where do you guys like to obtain your information? The question is really, someone has a brother who's a doctor and they're not quite sure how to collaborate and learn. And I'll just open it up. My perspective is really, these doctors should be reading PubMed, and because there's so many amazing publications out there. And I also really think conferences like these are the opportunity to meet people in the space and just get updated. I feel like if you're not at these conferences on the regular, you've maybe missed 10 or 12 kind of fundamental changes that we now know. So Dr. Janice, how do you like to get information, or how do you stay informed, and how do you think other docs could do the same?
Well, you know, several things. I do use PubMed quite a bit. I also use ResearchGate, and these are research papers and can be very, very heavy and hard to read. But we are co-founders, my family and I, the other docs in my team, we're co-founders of something called Advent Academy. And what we've done is in collating a lot of material between the conferences we go to and the researchers that we've met and what's in PubMed or ResearchGate or any place else we do our research, we've tried to put all that information together as a more, sort of friendly way for doctors can get information quickly. And it's called Advent Academy. That's our clinical training program for doctors. And we always will list all the references. So everything that we have found in PubMed and other places will be there. But it's a 5-module course to start off with that starts with the history and take us through the initial science. And it's a living thing. It's always changing because we're learning more and more about this plant and the physiology that it addresses. But that's one place I send clinicians to who want to learn and want to be able to apply information right away without being scattered all over the place trying to pull the information together. So we try to do that.
I'm curious to ask you a follow-up, Dr.
Yeah.
Janice. Do you think that there's a medical curriculum? Is there a full-blown residency program?
No, there's not. And it's interesting you asked that. So we call ourselves endocannabinologists, and we really think endocannabinology should be a subspecialty in medicine. It should
Where
not
should
be
it
cannabis.
fit?
Well, we're working on that now. We're now sort of collaborating with a university to get a program in endocannabinology going. So it's not there yet. And we're creating this program because we think it's that important. It's that important to understand the physiology. And the reason why I say that, it's not just cannabis that affects this physiology. There's other things, other botanicals, even some of the mushrooms that will affect this physiology. The way we live every day affect this physiology. So it always needs to be the physiology first. And then how do we apply everything we know about cannabis or about, other sort of influencers on the cannabinoids? How do we apply that in clinical practice? How do we take that into consideration? So that's what endocannabinology is about.
You don't think of it as like a dual subspecialty where maybe somebody would be internal medicine and sports medicine. Could they be internal medicine and cannabinoid medicine?
They should. That's the question. I think cannabinoid, and it shouldn't be cannabinoid medicine. I'm going to stop that. I'm going to say it should be about endocannabinoid system, right? Okay. It should be a part of every medical school curriculum because all the physiology we know is depending on this, what we call the bigger picture, the endocannabinoid ohm. So it's not just the endocannabinoid system, it's the bigger lipid signaling system that serves to fine tune all the physiological processes of the body.
I like it. Thus it's really endocannabinoid focused as opposed to exogenous.
Well, we're talking about two different things, right?
Okay.
You're talking about the cannabinoids themselves. So we have our endocannabinoids. Those are the neurotransmitters, that works on the cannabinoid system, those receptors. So when you define the ECS, the conventional description are the receptors, CB1, CB2, the endocannabinoids or ligands, that work on those receptors. That's a second component. And then there are the degradative and biosynthetic enzymes that create those endocannabinoids. So endocannabinoids work on the system. The phytocannabinoids, or part of the exocannabinoids, which outside the body produce, endos produced in,
Plant-based.
exo out. So phytos is one of them, and then the synthocannabinoids. So the exocannabinoids have the phytocannabinoids, then the synthocannabinoids, right? So the synthos are the one that made in the lab, like dronabinol or sesamet. The phytos are like cannabis. Yes, yes.
You distinguish the mono compound from the full spectrum in this in this diagram.
When you're talking about cannabis, say cannabis products, then we talk about the kind of product. So we're talking about something different yet. So we have full spectrum versus broad spectrum versus the isolate. That's when we're talking about the phytocannabinoids themselves. But when we're talking about what works on the bigger system, we know three things that'll influence as far as cannabinoids: the endos that are made in our body, the exos, which include phytos and synthos, and under the phytos, you can start creating product lines, right? Full spectrum, broad spectrum, isolates. And then synthos are the ones that are made in the labs.
I thank you so much for outlining the full breadth. I think sometimes doctors can be really focused in one arena, and I think it's so important for you to give us that 360 kind of view. Let me ask Dr. Carumet, I'm sorry, I keep tripping on it every time.
That's psychotropic score is tripping.
What do you think about staying informed? And I also was wondering if Dr. Janice could put a link in the box to answer that question, just so somebody could look up your curriculum specifically. But yeah, how do you stay informed, and how do you organize this all in your head?
Well, I stay informed because basically every day I spend almost all day reading literature and discussing endocannabinoid science or medicine with other colleagues, and that's pretty much all that I do. I don't rely on PubMed just because I'm not much of a news service sort of a person, just like I don't rely on the New York Times to give me the news. I really rely on people like Dr. Janice and other people that I know, Dr. Bierman, Philip Blair, lots of people that I know in the space, because all of us are looking at different articles and different aspects. And if I follow what they're posting in different places, especially say LinkedIn, then sometimes I see things that I otherwise wouldn't see because I don't typically say read Forbes or something. And someone posted yesterday an article on Forbes about some work of Dr. Meshulam with the synthetic cannabinoid, and the person who posted it had made some errors. And I'm kind of a proofreading mind person, so I went through and kind of showed that what was in the Forbes article wasn't really true. So there are a lot of misinformation or partially correct information in the cannabinoid space, especially in the lay media, but even often in the scientific journals. And so people may recall that Sanjay Gupta on CNN, from his big, huge visible position, first time around said that cannabinoids, cannabis for medicine, that was just, crap, and there was no evidence. And I guess it was 2 years later that he came back and he recanted, and
That's a hard lesson in proofreading. That's a very hard, very public lesson in proofreading.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's part of the reason why I don't pay that much attention to news outlets, because you're relying on one person whose real focus isn't knowing things, but reporting things.
Crazy. Yeah.
Hold on, guys. I'm sorry. Something came up on my screen. Let me get rid of this. Okay, great. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. I think that's a great point. Just that if you take a quick answer, you really miss a lot of the nuance that Dr. Janice just outlined for us.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't even call it nuance, because that second special on cannabis, I guess, was probably 2 hours long. And they try to cover a lot of topics, all the way from growing to clinical management, and then even looking at an individual company, which I think was pretty inappropriate for them to go and look at Charlotte's Web especially without investigating the company like an investor would to see,
Highlight
well, what,
one, yeah,
yeah, to see what are they really
a
doing.
buyer.
So it puts them up on this international spotlight as though they're better than everyone else who's out there. And that's what people started to believe. But the point is, Sanjay Gupta, for all of the work that he's done, and he's a neurosurgeon and all that, he's not actually a pharmacologist. He's not an expert in botanical medicine. And there's only so much time that he has to get across a point. And so if we rely on those sorts of perspectives, it can be very misleading. So what I do is I look at the endocannabinoid system, because the way medicine is taught, at least when I was in medical school and my understanding of the way medicine is taught, we look at various systems, physiologic systems like the cardiovascular system and the circulatory system. And in pharmacology, we look at certain systems that have been discovered along the way, like the adrenergic system or the serotonin systems in the central nervous system, et cetera, et cetera. So the endocannabinoid system is actually bigger than all of those. And so it actually doesn't make any sense that anybody wouldn't teach it. Cannabis is important, and it's just a matter of what perspective you look at it from, which one is more important. So as humans, I would say the endocannabinoid system is more important because it's inside of everyone's body, and it's basically the fundamental operating system for the majority of the other systems in the body. It's controlling everything, kind of like on my iPad, the Apple operating system is allowing all the other apps to function, including the Zoom app, which just stopped functioning.
I like the notion of it as an operating system. I think that's kind of a clever way to underscore the point, which is really everybody needs to be taught. I think we're all in agreement about the curriculum and the learning components of the future of cannabis medicine.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at the history of medicine, there was a time when doctors didn't know that blood circulated through blood vessels. And it was just believed that the blood just sloshed around as you moved and you walked, because when a soldier got shot or stabbed or whatever, blood just came gushing out everywhere. When they finally understood from dissections and other studies that there's this circulatory system with the heart and all of that, imagine trying to be a surgeon or an internist without studying that aspect. That wouldn't make any sense. You know, imagine somebody's an orthopedic surgeon who knows nothing about blood flow. That wouldn't make any sense. So endocannabinology isn't really a specialty in the sense of you can either do it or not. It's like you need to know it. It's like basic life support. It's like oxygen. You need to know that people breathe and that the blood carries oxygen. And if you don't know that, you're not a doctor. So the medical schools are being
truly fundamental.
Yeah, it's fundamental.
It's really
and the medical schools are being negligent by not teaching it.
Well, here's the other thing too, and this is a very interesting point I like to remind people of. We approved, we meaning the FDA, US FDA, approved Sesamet and dronabinol in the mid-'80s as treatments for chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting. We didn't know about the endocannabinoid system until 1990. So here we have things that are approved for the body before they even knew how this thing worked. So that's just an interesting caveat. But the reason why we're so insistent that endocannabinology be a subspecialty in medicine, because it does affect every physiological system in the body. The skin, talk about the skin, then look at the skin's endocannabinoid system. What is functioning in that skin? What receptors are there? Or cardiology, or reproductive system, or even your GI tract system. They're all connected. And one of the things that I think it's marvelous that I learned just by understanding the rhythm and patterns of what's going on in the body is that we in conventional medicine did a wonderful job of dissecting the body. You know, you're a cardiologist, or you're a pulmonologist, or you a GI doctor, blah, or you do psychiatry. We dissected that body. None of those entities work in isolation. The endocannabinoid dome, the bigger system, is connecting them all together. You affect one, you're going to affect another. So it's making us rejoin the body from spirituality to, you know, where we get into the ground. The ECS is in every last one of us. It's constantly adapting and readapting to assaults to the body, both inside and out. Its job is to bring harmony. And the ECS, the conventional description The ECS, those components I talked about earlier, are just a part of the bigger lipid system, lipid signaling system. If you look at the GI tract, what we're finding out from research is that GI, brain, ECS axis is very important in overall health. Just starting with the GI tract, you cannot dissect any system. So yes, the cardiologists need to know about it. Yes, the pulmonologist, the endocrinologist, the gynecologist, they need to know something basic about this physiology. And I don't know how medical schools can continue to teach physiology without first understanding the big kahuna that controls all the physiological processes.
And at least pointing out the receptor locations at the very least. At the very, very least.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
also, I would say pointing out that we really don't know the endocannabinoid system fully yet.
Nope.
And so
Really
the endocannabinoid system was discovered because of cannabis. Okay. And so that's why I was saying it's a matter of how do you decide which is more important, cannabis or the endocannabinoid system, because people seem to want to make that decision. But the point is, we wouldn't even know that it was there. Discoveries in medicine are typically made either based on deficiencies, like nutritional deficiencies, and so vitamins were discovered, or different toxins that affect people, say from tetrodotoxin from the fugu, the pufferfish that's very popular in sushi in Japan, but will kill you if you eat it without preparing it correctly. That's how we tend to discover things. Why is there understanding of the opioid system in the body? Because of opium. So for people to even try and marginalize botanical or natural substances, it's kind of like people that go to college and pretend that they're smarter than the teachers who taught them in high school. It's like, you wouldn't even be there. You know, everybody, no matter how smart they are, people think Elon Musk is very smart, but he had a high school teacher. You know, and so
stand on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah, cannabis is that teacher that has taught us. And it should be really, really embarrassing. You know, there are things that are embarrassing that, you know, you're 35 years old or 40 years old, and suddenly you find out something. It's like, oh, I didn't know that was true. I didn't know, I didn't know that there were gender issues or something. And you feel really stupid. It's like, how did I go 40 years and not know this thing? Well, how did medicine go for 150, 200 years, say modern medicine, and not know that the endocannabinoid system was there? It's taken a very long time. There are a lot of cultural issues that get in the way, because in this culture, the concept of psychotropism is anathema. And so, and Dr. Janice here is an anesthesiologist. I trained in anesthesia as well. Anything that affects the brain and level of consciousness, that is kind of put into a box someplace. And for decades, it was always said, well, if something creates intoxication, it's simply disturbing membranes. It's perturbing the normal function of the body. It's a non-specific activity. So these drugs, these substances, natural substances, were long thought to just have kind of a non-specific effect, kind of like women before they had the vote. Men thought that women just kind of have this non-specific effect on reality. They don't vote, they don't go to war. And so cannabis and other compounds like that are marginalized. And to understand that this is at the center of the entire picture, and that this system is running the other systems, but we needed a teacher, and it's still going on. So for me, just to throw one little aspect as far as the synthetics, until we really understand the endocannabinoid system very well, the idea of synthetics as drugs, as opposed to experimental agents, but as drugs that are prescribed to people, is a bit putting the cart before the horse, because that's how we create side effects, because you don't really know what that slight modification is going to do to the rest of the body. We got to see that with opiates, right? Fentanyl is not the same as morphine, and carfentanil. So there are things to be learned before charging off. You guys are
sort of teeing it up for me between the FDA, contaminants, FDA-approved medicines. I sort of want to work through the process. Are we satisfied with the GMP approach, or they sometimes call it CGMP, current good manufacturing processes? The Office of Pharmaceutical Quality is really the approach by which we get our drugs through the FDA. Are we comfortable with a office of cannabis pharmaceutics? How would you want the manufacturing and the FDA to intersect to make it a valuable medicine?
They don't have the expertise. They don't have the expertise when it comes to a botanical. So, I mean, that's why pharmaceutical companies try to dumb down the plant by using isolates. Pharmacology is traditionally a study of single agent activity, single agent bioactivity, one molecule at a time. And when you have over 100 bioactive compounds in a particular substance, that overwhelms the science because it's a very complex data stream. We do, though, have the ability to manage that data stream now because we have advanced computing capacities compared to, say, the 1970s when Dr. Candace Pert discovered the endogenous opioid system and the endorphins, and that's what really got me started in this direction, because I was studying biochemistry at the time when that discovery came out. And I was amazed that there's a plant somewhere in Southeast Asia that has its own personal key to the inside of my brain, even though I had never been to Thailand or Laos at the time. And
well, I guess the question is, who do you want to develop the medicine? How do you want that medication developed? Would you like it to go through this sort of mono compound?
No, not at all.
Studying approach, or are you comfortable with the full?
No, not at all. That's like I said, it's dumbing it down because cannabis, there's this tendency in this culture to be very reductionist and try to decide what's important and what's not. Even talking about THC and CBD. Why? Because they're the major cannabinoids. Why? Because they're the majority. Just because something's the majority doesn't mean that the other compounds aren't important. I can give you nanomoles of fairly different compounds that will be more active than milligrams of other compounds. So that way of thinking is not particularly scientific, it's not intelligent, it's not even medical. So it's important to look at the system, because otherwise it's like looking at the heart and not looking at the arteries. It's like looking at the heart and not looking at the adrenal glands that are determining the arterial tone. So it's important for us to understand the system, and as well with cannabis, the complexity that cannabis is presenting us is a single entity in the sense of how does that interact with the body. And then once that's understood, you could try and pare it away and say, well, we'll do this with this, or we'll do that with this other isolate. But where's the wisdom behind that? That's really more tradition, saying I want to have a single molecule, I want to know what the dose is. Sure. And I know what the dosage is for every person.
Are you more?
I think that's the wrong approach.
Deschedule it, go to Schedule 2, research it more. Then
no, I'm not saying that it needs to be researched beforehand. I'm not one of those people that believes that doctors and scientists are in charge of health. You know, as a physician, I don't think of myself as being in charge of your body. I just happen to be a geeky, nerdy person who loves to read and study it. And so I know things about it that you may not know, but ultimately the final proof of any medicine is not a clinical trial, whether it's double-blind, placebo-controlled or not. Again, with the bias of anesthesia, it's what's happening right now with this patient sitting
That's
right
correct.
here in front of me.
Absolutely correct.
Really
when
curious
I think about the FDA, what I see the FDA is doing, because cannabis is here to stay as a therapeutic tool. All I see the FDA doing is saying, yes, this product is safe because we have these standards, and holding these producers up to creating standards. But for them to decide what we can or cannot use is a mistake. And if we learn anything from the history of what the journey cannabis has traveled through, we understand what happened to cannabis. We understand how pharmaceutical companies came in and took over and gave us single molecule medicines. And we have those side effects. I tell people the further we get away from natural things, the more side effects we see. We see no side effects with the endocannabinoids. We see some side effects with cannabis because it stays on that receptor too long. We have those toxic effects. Cannabis is not natural to our body. Our endocannabinoids, or anandamide that THC mimics, is. So we don't see those side effects. We go to the synthetic cannabinoids, you see even more side effects. So the further you get away from natural, the more side effects you're going to see. So that's one thing. What understanding the endocannabinoid system has done for me, it's tied what we call Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine, Native American medicine, medicine that has been practiced for thousands of years. We can understand now why those medicines work, why those botanicals have worked, why they believe in them, because they didn't know about the physiology of the body. They knew these plants worked. And so
Right.
now we can explain why they worked. And as far as letting the FDA come in and decide for us, I mean, man put that big gap between plant medicine and
Yep.
man. We need to take that component out. Say, FDA, we love what you do, but stick to your lane. You need to stick to your lane, period. And
What
then,
about a specific issue like heavy metals or microbiological contaminants?
That's a separate issue. That's a
Absolutely.
toxicity issue. So that's not cannabis's fault. That has to do with who grows it and where,
It's
and
the
that's an issue. Say
So
that again?
it's
Oh,
really the pipeline. So if we don't have
yeah.
a safe pipeline, a production, do we really have a suitable medicine? Do we have a pharmaceutical grade medicine?
Yeah,
well,
so you still do have a medicine that is not being produced correctly. So you might have a generic medicine. I think, for instance, like I said, fentanyl is generic now. And if somebody is producing it improperly and there are heavy metals in this injectable product, then that's a problem, but it's not fentanyl's fault and it's not the opium poppy's fault. It's that company's fault. So the regulatory guidelines with respect to production are a separate issue from the medicine, how it works, and learning how to use it properly. And those two things need to work together, just like pharmaceutical companies do generally an excellent job of producing their single molecule drugs that aren't really single molecules because they have excipients. And so there are other bioactive compounds and inactive compounds in any preparation, but they do a fairly excellent job from their factory to the actual point of use in a clinic or a hospital, that there is no adulteration. And so the cannabis industry needs to be able to meet or exceed that standard. I don't see any reason to use their standard. I see every reason to exceed it.
we need to exceed their standard. We need, and what people don't understand, that cannabis plant, cannabis hemp, whatever they want to call it, it is a plant. It's an amazing bioaccumulator. It cleans the soil. So anything that's in that soil is going to whoop it up. And we do have to account for those contaminants. That's where you start talking about your standards, your lab standards. If the FDA want to do anything, make sure everybody who's manufacturing have those standards and meet those standards. And as Kareem said, go above that. This is a medicine and it's here to stay. How we use it is the question, and how we adapt it to ever expanding knowledge of how it works. For example, I'm like him, like Dr. Kareem, I love to dig underneath the hood. I'm an anesthesiologist as well. So I look at those receptors. I have a patient come in, they tell me have XYZ problem. I'm going to start at the molecular level to understand what's happening with that endocannabinoid dome or system that I need to correct. I'm not going to symptomatically treat them. I want to treat at the root cause. That means I understand enough about the physiology that I can go look, okay, so now I have cannabis in my cabinet. I can use nutrition. I can use all these other things to address the problem I see that's setting this patient up for all these issues. So that's how we need to think. And we need the FDA to say, okay, doctor, you've done this. Here are safe products that you can use because they meet the standards. That's all I want the FDA to do. I think they have no business telling me why or when or how or who I should use cannabis on.
Follow-up question to you, Dr. Janice. So when you're looking at a patient's full history and you're thinking about food and maybe sources of food, even an organic food versus a non-organic food, do you have the same thoughts about cannabis? Where are you concerned about the pesticides, let's say, or
absolutely, absolutely. Number one, when we talk to a patient, we tell them your first medicine is your food. Because a lot of those things that we find in cannabis, say whether it's the terpenes or flavonoids, you can probably send them to their spice cabinet and pull those things out. Or essential oils, which is concentrated, terpenes. But we are determined. We will tell them, look, reading your label on your product is important. They should have a code, a COA that tells you exactly what's in that product, how it's been lab tested. What did they find? Did they find heavy metals or other toxins or bacteria or mold? We need to know that before we can send a patient to a medicine. We want safe products out there. And if they're not lab tested, do not buy it. Do not recommend it. You know, and some states have different standards of what they'll test for. Oregon doesn't test for mold. It
Right.
doesn't even necessarily say you have to have the terpenes listed. We
How
want
do they
all of that.
justify that? How do they justify no microbiological testing?
There is no standardization between states. Once again, we need to change all that. And that's in policy and regulations. You have people creating policy and regulation that know absolutely nothing about the plant
Nothing.
or as a medicine or anything else.
Or toxicology or anything.
Or toxicology. They're working from the stigma. They're working from the stigma.
Yeah.
Dr. Khalif, same about states. How do you want, are you comfortable with maybe states coming together and making one standard, or this state by state thing is working for you? How do you see it? The states
aren't really in a position to have the expertise to do that work. They made the first step effort to legalize it, or really kind of to decriminalize it. There's still, as Dr. Janice was saying, a stigma associated with cannabis, even in the places where it's legal. And it's, it's kind of the thing where people come out of a dispensary and a police car drives by, people still have that reaction because it kind of doesn't feel like it's really as accepted as coffee. So coffee is a psychotropic medicinal plant. Much coffee is grown with pesticides. Is anybody checking their pesticide residue, the heavy metal content? Does anybody know how their coffee is regulated? It is regulated in a lot of different ways, from the financial sense to the toxicology sense. So these sorts of standards shouldn't be unfamiliar. The difference is when somebody is using coffee medicinally. So coffee is a fairly complex, not as complex as cannabis, but a fairly complex botanical. It's an aqueous hot water extract in general of the bean of this plant, okay? People dose themselves with it. We don't run around saying, so how much caffeine did you have today? How much caffeine? I used to think there was more caffeine in espresso than there is in regular so-called American coffee. And according to Starbucks, at least their version, what they have posted on the website, there isn't. So there are a lot of things that we just don't know about what we're putting in our bodies and what the effects are. So part of this is, like I was saying, you get to be 40 years old and 60 years old and you realize, wow, I didn't know that about myself. I didn't know I had an endocannabinoid system. I didn't know that coffee was psychotropic. And I didn't know that Tylenol or acetaminophen actually functions as a cannabinoid, that it binds to the same receptor. Once it's metabolized, it binds to the same receptor as THC. Wow, that's like embarrassing enough to just like go and just take a long bath and say, I thought I was smart, but I'm not. And so the arrogance with which people approach regulations and standardization, to me, is a little bit ahead. So a dedicated group like the Cannabis Quality Consortium, those sorts of groups that are really looking at all of the different aspects from the agriculture all the way to the final experience of the consumer, that's the kind of group that needs to be there. The FDA can stand on the side, but FDA didn't develop organic standards, and so, they co-opted them and then they modified them. And did they make them better?
Federal agencies, yeah. I want to ask about adverse events reporting. Mm-hmm. Certainly, there will be events, and is poison control the right person to take on these conversations? How do we want to surveil these? Do we need a surveillance system for cannabis adverse events?
There needs to be a surveillance system for toxic effects in general. It doesn't need to just be cannabis. It could also include, soft drinks.
That's exactly right. I'm always so amazed people want to do all this to cannabis. Cannabis is one of the most safest thing a patient can take. It's so safe. Yes, you can have some issues, but they're nowhere near on the same chart as some of the pharmaceutical drugs we clinicians happily will prescribe without a second thought. What we like to talk about at Dr. Knox, we talk about the correct clinical application. I don't even believe there's any cons to using cannabis. I believe there's correct clinical application. Meaning, if I have a patient that I know is on warfarin or on a blood thinner and they need CBD, I need to understand what enzymes in that liver is going to be affected so that warfarin level doesn't, creep up and get the patient in trouble. There is correct clinical application. Cannabis is one of the safest drugs you can take. And if you're going to report anything, let's report warfarin or some of those anti-epileptics or those
Warfarin
opioids
is
that are
rat
killing
poison.
people. Yes, let's talk about that because cannabis is not there. But if you want to put it on the list, so be it. But it's going to
Yeah.
be low on the list of things that I would be concerned about as a clinician looking at this.
If some
Cannabis is
hasn't,
safer than Tylenol.
Yes, it is.
do you guys believe in an acute kind of overdose, not overdose per se, but an acute event of excessive cannabis consumption?
Sure.
And should they have somebody to talk to, or should they just kind of run it out with the clock and wait it out?
You know, but people overdose on lots of things. People overdose on alcohol.
Yeah.
You know, people overdose on Viagra.
On food.
On food, yeah. On sugar.
Water.
So that's part of our culture. So part of the thing here, part of this culture is that we have a tendency, I'll include myself, even though I don't like to, we have a tendency to blame the plant. We blame the coca leaf, we blame the opium poppy, we blame, you know, the cannabis plant, a number of them. Whenever somebody has an untoward event, you know, ephedra, and a lot of people were overusing it, and some people had heart attacks. That's our use, and that's part of our culture to overdo things in that way. As I mentioned, I worked in the Amazon with traditional healers. They have ayahuasca, psychotropics, and all that. You don't find teenagers overdosing on ayahuasca. You don't find guys sneaking it into girls' drinks at a party and taking them out on a canoe. It's just not part of that culture. That's part of the culture here. That's not the fault of the plant. The regulation, it shouldn't really be seen as being against the plant. It's protecting us from ourselves. So the part of the thing is, with respect to cannabis and an overdose, first of all, what is the issue? Like I said, the issue is that this culture has a huge issue with psychotropics, with human beings being able to manage and modulate their own mood, their own experience of reality. But let me just throw one little thing in there. So cannabis is perceived as a party drug, as something that you dry and you smoke. Why? Because that's just the common perception. But that's not the plant. As Dr. Janice mentions, if you look at traditional medicines that have thousands of year history, like traditional Chinese medicine or Ayurveda, a dried plant and a fresh plant are not even seen as the same drug. Okay, so fresh cannabis is not intoxicating. You can feed it to cattle, you can feed it to your goat, you can eat it yourself. It doesn't get you high. The THC is produced by us, drying it and curing it and burning it and smoking it. So even the concept of a marijuana overdose or a cannabis overdose has to do with how have we created this distorted relationship with the plant. So yes, there's a need for help with that, but there's also a need for marriage counseling and abused children counseling. We do a lot of things badly. So
well,
let's
let
single
me
out
say this
marijuana.
one thing too. I know my husband spent 40 years in that emergency room, and he can count the number of cannabis patients he'd come in on one hand. But when you see those patients now, most of them are coming in because they have not been taught how to use cannabis, THC in particular. And you'll see some of these patients being admitted to the to intensive care and just to be sent home the next day, because they had acute THC intoxication because they ate the whole cookie and didn't know, eat a little bit of cookie, and their systems weren't ready for that. To me, that points back to our healthcare providers, and I don't care what their initials are behind their name, understanding the physiology and understanding the chemistry, the pharmacology behind this plant, and teaching those patients that this is what's happening. Let's sit you aside, let's play you some music, and let you watch TV, and we'll see it pass. But it also depends on the patient's condition. I have a patient with a cardiac patient, and he's had too much THC. That patient may be into some trouble. So once again, you have to look at a total picture of what's being presented. Once again, it's not the plant's fault. It's our fault by not understanding this plant or the physiology, and particularly providers. Your patients are going to come at you with this. Learn something about this, because no patient, most of them don't need to go to the intensive care unit if you clinician understand about the plant and the physiology. Sit them in a dark room, play some music, and tell them to have fun. That's
So you
it.
think it could be prevented? This could be prevented.
Education.
As far as everything, yeah.
Yeah,
Do you realize that people overdose on caffeine? That
sure.
the minimum toxic dose for caffeine is well within the reach of people, especially that take these enhanced caffeine, drink these drinks, and I won't mention the different brand names. But do you realize that there is a growing use pattern, let's say in the United States, usually in younger adults and teenagers, because it's not a regulated substance, of purified caffeine powder and snorting it? Okay, purified caffeine powder and spiking the drinks, the energy drinks as they call them, or even coffee, to boost the amount of caffeine into the hundreds, if not, thousands of milligrams, because they've developed a tolerance and they still want to reach that level of activity. So like I said, that's part of the culture. Nobody's going to pull coffee off of the shelf. The FDA has started to regulate the interstate trafficking of caffeine powder. Also now there is ethanol, the alcohol from, wine and beverages. People have powdered ethanol. Okay, so there's this extreme attitude in this culture of abuse.
Could be regulated.
Pardon?
You could regulate route of ingestion, not just.
Well, but the thing is, it's
product as well.
Things are not so clear. They're not so clear. The route of ingestion. So it depends, as Dr. Janice is mentioning, the condition of the person. Not everybody's digestion is the same. Out of the 3 people I see here on the screen, none of us have the same digestion. If we were to all eat the same brownie from the same batch, from the same manufacturer right now, our uptake would be different. That's why in the operating room, the anesthesiologist is completely separate from the surgeon. There's a person sitting there watching all these monitors and the EKG and the pulse ox and all that, because that's separate from the procedure that's going on. Because you may get an uptick. It's like, oh, the THC level of the absorption has gone way up. Oh, there must have been a lot of fat in that brownie. It bypassed the liver and went through the lymphatic system and it's crossed into the CSF. And now this person is twice as intoxicated as they were last time they had the same brownie, because they put a bunch of butter on it, or because they had a fatty meal, or these things change. The human body is not this machine that works the same way every time you power it up and it says hello. It is a dynamic instrument or device, a smart device with an endocannabinoid operating system that's designed to function differently depending on the environment. Whether you're in the Arctic Circle or if you're in the tropics, if you're in the desert, okay? If it's the middle of the night and you've been up for 20 hours, okay? If you're an ultra marathoner, okay? If you're in the middle of a battle zone, okay? Or if you're getting a massage, this system is accommodating all of those changes so that blood pressure, heart rate, appetite, all of these different systems are being modulated so that this smart device can still pick up the life signal that it needs so that we can go around and operate.
The ECS is the anesthesiologist. It's a one size. Medicine should have never been a one size fit all, and we got ourselves roped into that by pharmacology. Yeah. But I will tell you this: when I talk to a patient and I'm deciding on, okay, what's the best route of administration? It's going to once again depend on their disease process. If I have a patient come to me and tell me they have a GI problem, an edible is not going to be the best way for me to get that product into that patient, because I need to correct their GI problem first. Once again, I mentioned the GI brain ECS axis. That's huge, what we're learning about that by itself. But there may be a time when I think a rectal suppository is best, or sublingual, or put it in the buccal mucosa is a best route of administration. So that all, once again, depends on the patient, depends on the disease process, what their days need to look like, the problem that I'm trying to deal with, how I decide which route of administration. And along with that come onset of action and then duration of action. We take all those things into consideration when we're trying to treat a medical issue. So all these things become together into a picture on how we're going to apply this cannabis pharmacology to a patient, and how do we do it, and what amounts or what times a day. All those things come into play when you really understand the pharmacology and the the pharmacodynamics of this plant, and then applying it to that physiology. Okay.
So Dr. Leslie, one of the things, because I wanted to go back to a point you were raising earlier about GMP, CGMP. So what Dr. Janice is mentioning here, that's then where that becomes critical. because she's a specialist that has very specialized understanding about the entire body and what people need based on who they are, what their pre-existing conditions are. And
Correct.
so she's making intelligent decisions for those people, but that depends then on the quality of that suppository or whatever agent that she's giving. And if the people that are producing it aren't producing it consistently, and it's wavering between maybe 30 milligrams of THC and maybe down to 10, or maybe the CBD THC ratio is fluctuating, and they don't at least let her know, then that's where there's trouble, because she's really relying on these products. So often what we have to do is we identify different producers that are impeccable, that the product that they produce has what it says on the label, and from batch to batch to batch.
Why not regulate every producer instead of having a few that are impeccable? Why not make
you can try, but it's a process of slowly gathering people towards the center and hoping that quality and efficacy will attract the consumer. So part of it is, there are two types of consumer. One is the end consumer, the person who actually consumes the product. And then there's also the person like Dr. Janice, who is recommending it. Okay, so she's also kind of guiding people in a particular direction. So one of the types of projects that I work on, along with the Cannabis Quality Council, is how to gather the data that's needed to process it appropriately so that the decision makers, whether it's a consumer or an expert consumer like a health professional, can recognize the quality of this product, the utility of it, and where it came from, the components that you mentioned, like heavy metal. So all of that information is in front of a person, and they know from batch to batch to batch that this is really the same quality. This is it. There's a consistency to it. The consistency is not going to be the same as we presume, say, like I said, Viagra or Lipitor, because there's a collection of molecules being grown in nature, even if it's an indoor grow. So it's going to be a consistency more like coffee or chocolate or red wine, as opposed to white vinegar.
I think it's important too to say you guys really operate at an individual level, and many of my questions are at a population level, where I'm thinking, are we going to have 1,000 people in Colorado that have just visited on a trip, and now they have a news story about lead ingestion because it was grown in ground in somebody's grow,
Here's the thing that I think is going to happen, because we talk about the ecosystem from the person who put the seed into the ground to the customer's end result. And we do need to think about that ecosystem. I think time will filter out the bad players who do not understand the importance of having a quality medicine, quality production, standardized language, standardized procedures, SOPs. I think we're seeing that in the market now. So even though I see patients in the clinic, we oftentimes are talking to the manufacturers and growers. So you guys need to meet this standard, because patients are going to want this product. Not just patients here with me, but we get calls from patients globally who are looking for good information. And then the next question is, where do I get that safe product? So that's a huge thing for everybody. So we're trying to talk to the industry about what we need to do. And we call it a cannabis health equity movement. That's not just about health, but take into consideration environmental health, the financial aspect, the production, agriculture. All those things need to be talked about and dealt with if we're going to continue on this path of individualized or precision care. Not just cannabis, but the N of one. It's all about you and how you respond to whether it's conventional therapy, Chinese medicine, cannabis therapy. It doesn't matter. How do you respond? And we need to get away from putting so much emphasis on it. Oh, it has to have been a double-blind study that the FDA recommend. That's BS to me anymore.
Yeah.
I only want them to tell me that they've held companies accountable to standards that we're going to set for them to reach.
There are standards below the RCT style approach, for sure.
Well, the thing is, there's a flaw in that approach, because it's been going on for decades. I have friends that are medical directors at major pharmaceutical companies like Bristol Myers Squibb. They run the clinical trial where it is the most financially expeditious for them expedient for them to run the trial with respect to time and cost. So the trial to approve your drug may have been run in Croatia, it may have been run in Sri Lanka or Zimbabwe, it may have been run in Taiwan, and the pharmacogenetics of that population may not match the population that's being served in Colorado or Michigan, okay? And in fact, some countries like Japan have legislation that a drug that's approved in other countries, for instance, in the US, has to undergo an additional trial with Japanese subjects to make sure there isn't some weird quirk that would then affect their population. That's smart. So this generalizability is kind of a myth. And if anything, the 20th century should teach us is that we're all different people, we're all individuals, and we have different responses to things. And to try and herd people as though it's just a bunch of cattle heading off to their workplace of the Industrial Revolution, that's very old. Okay, and it's very important. Yes, so populations are important. Like you mentioned, you have 100 tourists who come in and they get lead poisoning. Okay, if 100 people get lead poisoning, that means there was a problem with the soil. It wasn't an issue with cannabis. And so that could happen with corn. Okay, that could happen with other crops. It could happen definitely with soy.
But it's not a smoked form. A smoked
tobacco,
form.
then look at tobacco. Look at how toxic tobacco is in cigarettes. You know, look at the situation with vaping. And the vitamin E acetate, they blamed it on cannabis, but it was vitamin E.
The Holy Valley phenomenon, for sure, is definitely a lesson. Guys, we're getting so short on time. We clearly had too short of a segment for all this conversation. I want to give one last little just piece that you guys could send us out on. Either hyperemesis syndrome, I just would love to have you guys touch on it. It was a question in our box. Or if you don't like that question, I would love to ask about the occupational workplace. Often people who are workers in some of these situations have increased exposure. And I wondered if that was something that was a concern for you, if there was some kind of occupational concern. There are certainly publications around the decarboxylation process and lung irritation. And I just think that the occupational space hasn't been fully charted in cannabis medicine. But also cannabinoid hyperemesis is something that people want to know about. So happy to touch on those last 2 points. I'll let you guys get your thoughts out, and let's try to wrap up our session.
I'm going to say something real quickly about the hyperemesis syndrome. I answered that question privately.
Thank you.
Research is showing us that it's definitely connected to THC. So, and long-term THC users, and the therapy is they need to stop THC. And some of these people will be off THC forever. But we have to make sure we're not confusing it with cyclic vomiting syndrome. The hyperemesis syndrome is real. It's definitely real, but we often confuse it when they come into the ER with cyclic vomiting. And there's certain things patients will do, take a cold shower or whatever it is, that'll get symptomatic relief that helps point us to that direction. But the answer to that is that we need to get them off the THC. It's THC connected. And with that, I really have to run, folks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Janice.
All right. Bye, Kareem. See you later.
Bye. See you later, Janice.
Take care, y'all.